Anyone who stood in that conference room that morning would have said the same thing. There was no sign, not even the faintest hint of the $500 million storm quietly forming beneath the surface. Everything was too polished, too perfect, as if the universe were trying to fool everyone with a glossy coat hiding the rot underneath. And in the middle of that shine, Elias Turner sat inside the glass office on the 46th floor, his deep brown eyes thoughtful calm in a way that made it seem like the world could never shake him. But the world was about to shake because of him in the most literal sense. Elias Turner, 43 years old, CEO of Nova Route Systems, a man capable of shifting the entire global logistics industry with a single decision. Yet the first thing people noticed about him was not his reputation, his wealth, or his influence. It was the quiet, a kind of quiet that made people forget he was even in the room until he spoke, and then every head turned instinctively toward him, like still water rippling when wind suddenly passes across the surface. But that morning, he said nothing. He simply sat there, flipping through the printed pages of the Apex Continental contract, a $500 million deal in its final stage. $500 million waiting for his signature, a number that could rescue Apex from years of losses and push them back into the race with Starbound Airways and Meridian. For Elias, the deal was not only profitable for Nova Route, it was strategic a gateway to expand their AI logistics network into commercial aviation, a plan he had been laying the groundwork for during the past 4 years. And yet, inside the strange stillness of the glass office, the first thing he felt was not the excitement of a historic agreement. It was a weight, something heavy and indescribable, like a thin wire being stretched to its limit, waiting for a single movement to snap and send sharp fragments flying in every direction. Elias knew that feeling. It always appeared before big turning points, a kind of instinct he could never explain. He stood and walked to the glass wall, looking down at New York City sprawled beneath him. Below, people rushed, horns blared, lives flowed past unseen. He touched the cold surface, feeling the chill seep into his fingertips. He never liked moments when he stood this high above the world because they reminded him of where he came from. He had grown up in South Bronx, surrounded by the wail of ambulance sirens, winters filled with the crackle of broken heaters, and summers roaring with motorbikes tearing through narrow streets. It was a world where people believed that even the smart ones would eventually be crushed by life unless they ran faster than the hardship chasing them. Elias did not run. He climbed quietly, steadily, with a mind many underestimated, until the moment they lost to him. He remembered the teacher who first saw his potential, Professor Sanford Ellery, the man Elias was flying to Chicago to visit. He had once told him, "Turner, you don't need to speak loudly to be heard, you just need to speak correctly." Elias had lived by that ever since. A soft knock sounded. Harper Quinn, his executive assistant, moved with the speed of an electric current flowing into the room. "Your flight schedule is confirmed, Mr. Turner," she said, placing her tablet on the table. "Apex Continental Flight 612, Seat 2A as requested. Their team will receive you in Chicago, and CEO Richard Hale is hoping to meet you before the signing." A faint half-smile crossed Elias's face, not fully warm, not fully polite. "Hale wants to meet me because he thinks he has already won," Elias said quietly. Won against his competitors, won in front of his shareholders, won against the fate dragging his company down. Harper raised an eyebrow. She had worked with Elias long enough to recognize when he was sensing something others didn't. "You don't like Apex, do you?" Elias exhaled slowly, a controlled but weighted breath. "I don't like." He opened his eyes and looked straight at companies that think branding can hide a rotten culture. Harper paused, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, as if he already knew something was wrong at Apex, as if he could feel what no one else had seen yet. "Do you want to switch airlines?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "No, we stay with the plan." That calmness, that persistence. Harper had no idea that within a few hours, every word in that sentence would become fate. 1 hour later, Elias was in the Apex VIP lounge at JFK. No entourage, no assistants. He always preferred traveling alone, not because he was mysterious, but because he was used to existing in the silent space between noisy people. For many, wealth meant entourages, private cars, a small army of staff. But for Elias, true power was not displayed. True power lived in the decisions that could shift an entire industry. Staff in the lounge looked at him like any other first-class business traveler, successful and composed, but not recognizable as the CEO who was about to reshape their future. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Invisibility always gave him an advantage before the truth arrived, like a punch to the chest of the unprepared. He sat on the soft sofa, an espresso steaming in front of him, opening Marcus Aurelius' Meditations to the passage that had once saved him from the darkest moment of his life. An insult only exists if you accept it. He remembered being dismissed by a bank manager who didn't believe he could even open an account because his hands were covered in engine grease from working at his Uncle S. repair shop. He remembered that feeling of being reduced, reshaped into the version someone else wanted to see. But Elias never let the world decide who he was. Then a strong, overly sweet scent drifted past a perfume trying too hard to smell expensive. Elias didn't look up, but he knew someone was standing near his table, evaluating him from head to toe, pretending to be subtle but failing miserably. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" A young man asked, his voice dripping arrogance. Elias looked up. A 28-year-old in a pearl-colored polo hair slicked with gel, the confident grin of someone who had never known failure. "Yes, by me," Elias answered softly. The young man's eyes flickered just for a moment, then he smirked and walked off silently, declaring that Elias was not worth competing with. Elias didn't mind. But his instinct tightened again, a faint warning like distant lightning announcing a storm arriving early. Harper called just as he was heading toward the gate. "Mr. Turner Apex sends advance thanks for the signing. They say everything is ready for system transfer within 8 days after the deal is signed." Elias stopped. 8 days too fast. Yes, seems like they are really desperate. Elias didn't respond right away. For a strange second, the deal felt too smooth, too easy, as if everything was arranged to push him into signing before he could see what was hiding underneath. Harper asked again, "Do you still want to proceed?" Elias looked at the boarding pass in his hand. Seat 2. A first class, a seat he never cared for, but many others did. "Harper," he said quietly, "do you ever feel like something is standing behind the curtain, waiting for the moment to reveal itself?" Harper laughed. "You sound like a horror movie." Maybe Elias smiled faintly. "But I believe every system has a breaking point. And today I feel like I am about to see it, hopefully not on the flight." "It might be exactly on the flight," Elias replied. Those words would become a prophecy touching the edge of destiny. As Elias boarded, he had no idea that within hours the entire financial world would be talking about this flight. He had no idea that one small, seemingly meaningless decision would destroy a multi-billion-dollar company and rewrite the power balance of the aviation industry. He only knew one thing: something was wrong, and his instinct, the one that had saved him from countless strategic disasters, was pounding in his chest. Lena Brooks greeted him as he stepped into first class. Her smile was genuine, effortless, the kind of smile belonging to people who serve with sincerity while enduring things they cannot control. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "I hope your flight will be comfortable." Elias smiled back. "Thank you. My name is Elias." Lena blinked with brief surprise. Most first-class passengers preferred being addressed by title or surname, but Elias was not most people. "A pleasure, Elias," she replied. He settled into seat 2, fastening his belt, placing meditations on the table. He didn't know that right behind him, Chase Whitfield, the young man who had sized him up in the lounge, was entering the cabin with a petty but dangerous ambition to steal a better seat simply because he wanted it. And Elias also didn't know that the man who would soon stand in the middle of the cabin, Robert Coleman, a 30-year aviation veteran, was ready to bend rules to please passengers who seemed important. The calm in first class before takeoff was beautiful, but it wouldn't last. A storm was coming, a storm made of prejudice, arrogance, and power misunderstood. And Elias Turner, the man reading ancient philosophy, was about to face the moment that would turn his entire life into a symbol, the symbol of someone underestimated, yet holding power, an entire airline never imagined. The first-class cabin of Apex Flight 612 radiated a warm, golden light, soft and reassuring, a comfort reserved for those wealthy enough to feel at ease, high above the clouds. Within that calm warmth, Chase Whitfield's footsteps echoed with arrogant confidence, as if he had owned this space since birth. Elias Turner sensed the shift in the atmosphere immediately. Not the wind, not the sounds, but the subtle undercurrent of disruption, the kind that comes from human prejudice. Chase dropped his bag onto seat 2 Alpha right next to Elias and cast him a quick glance, one that said it all. A look from someone who believed positions, respect, and priority were automatically theirs. Elias did not respond. He didn't move. He didn't need to. He had grown used to such looks since he was a boy wiping grease in his Uncle-esque garage. The eyes of people who thought they were seeing him, when in truth they only saw a reflection of themselves full of mistaken assumptions. "Is this seat free?" Chase asked, without even checking his boarding pass, his tone lazy, but carrying an unspoken command. "Can I switch here?" Lena Brooks approached, her smile strained, caught between duty and pride. "So seat 2. Bravo is the crew rest seat for the connecting long-haul leg. I cannot allow you to sit here until Chase waved his hand, bored with the explanation. Yeah, just let me sit for a moment. Bring me a whiskey. Macallan 18. No ice." Elias flipped a page of his book not to read, but to steady his inner rhythm. In moments like this, silence was the only response that could be dignified. As all passengers boarded and the cabin doors prepared to close, Elias felt an unusual tension growing like ripples on a lake before a storm. And then it arrived. Lena appeared before him. The gentle smile from moments ago had vanished, replaced with a look of awkwardness. Beside her stood a man, his posture too straight, too rigid, too commanding. Robert Coleman, chief flight attendant of the plane. "Mr. Turner?" Lena began softly, her voice nearly lost. Coleman cut in metallic and cold. "We're experiencing a booking system issue. Your seat. 2 Alpha has been double booked." Elias lifted his eyes from the page, unhurried, deliberate, and slowly looked directly at the man, avoiding his gaze. "Your system," Elias said, his voice measured, "confirmed my seat yesterday. Both the e-ticket and the lounge printout." Coleman swallowed dry. "Yes, but another passenger with higher priority requires higher than executive premier." Elias asked gently. The silence that followed was so deep he could hear the air conditioning hum. Lena lowered her gaze. Chase behind them snorted in amusement. Elias knew what was happening. Not a system error, not a seat conflict. This was an old tune, a melody of prejudice where the loud win over the quiet, where appearances were valued over character. "We can offer you seat 14. Bravo Coleman continued attempting to maintain authority. Premium economy, spacious and comfortable. Elias almost smiled. Comfortable. He wasn't angry. He was weary of a world that always assumed people like him should stand aside. "And if I refuse?" Elias asked. Coleman straightened stern, reading as if from a manual. "We would have to call security and escort you off the plane to prevent flight delays." From behind, Chase spoke the smug tone of one who always believes he is right. "Don't make a fuss, buddy. Not everyone is used to sitting up front. Just move." Those words struck deep, not for insult, but because they reminded Elias of countless times he had watched others treated exactly the same way. A cold clarity rose within him. Elias closed meditations with a crisp snap. He stood calm, unhurried. "No need to call anyone," he said, his voice so composed that even Lena flinched slightly. He turned to her with a gaze of understanding she had never received from a first-class passenger. "Before I apologize. You've been caught in this situation. Just one sentence, just one apology to the right person." And Lena understood that this man who had just been forced out of his seat was unlike any passenger she had ever served. Elias Turner stepped off the plane entirely free. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not argue. That calm, that composure would bring down an empire within hours. As the jet bridge door closed behind him, he felt as if he had left a different atmosphere entirely. No air conditioning hum, no dismissive attitudes, no scrutinizing glances. Only the scent of concrete in the airport, the aroma of dark coffee from a nearby corner, and a chilling clarity that ran down his spine. Not everyone recognizes the moment their life changes. Elias did. This was his moment. He walked up to the check-in counter. Maggie, the attendant who had issued his boarding pass that morning, startled to see him return. "Mr. Turner, was there an issue with your flight?" Elias smiled a polite smile, but without warmth. I voluntarily stepped off. Maggie only managed to utter "I." But Elias walked straight past, never looking back. That sent a subtle unease through her, an unease she would later recall in detail when the media storm erupted. The small conference room at Apex Lounge was soundproof, a perfect place for strategic decisions or for destroying a business in minutes. Elias sat down in the soft leather chair, placing his briefcase on the table as if placing the entire life of a company on it. He took out his phone. "First call Harper." Harper answered, immediately concerned. "Mr. Turner." "What happened? Was there an issue with the flight?" "Not an issue," Elias replied. "An opportunity." Harper didn't understand. "You mean cancel the signing with Apex Continental tomorrow?" Elias said, each word sharp as a blade. "Immediately." Silence froze on the other end. "Cancel the contract. But the signing will never happen. Elias continued with no hesitation. Send the termination notice per Clause 4. Bravo violation of core values. Harper drew a deep breath. She had seen Elias make multi-million-dollar decisions, but $500 million cancelled in under 2 minutes. Are you sure? Absolutely. The certainty in his voice sent a chill down Harper's spine. This was not the certainty of anger, but the certainty of someone who held enough data to act decisively. And the reason for Apex? She asked. Elias looked at the transparent glass, his reflection against the pale blue sky. No reason. He stood one hand in his pocket. They'll understand themselves. And he ended the call. In the silence of that small room, Elias felt the pieces of his life click into place, from the laboring neighborhoods of the Bronx, from the scornful looks, from being underestimated, from every effort to make the world see him as he truly was. No one on that flight knew the man asked to leave. Seat 2 Alpha held Apex S future in his hands. No one knew that mere minutes of injustice would erase a billion-dollar company from the market. No one knew that Chase Whitfield, the one who had just smirked, would ignite the very collapse of his Uncle S Corporation. And Elias Turner, the one deemed not important enough to keep Seat 2 Alpha, would become the spark of a historic downfall. A small moment, a huge mistake, an irreversible consequence, and the storm had only just begun. As the early morning sunlight filtered through the towering skyscrapers of New York City, Damian Walker stepped out of his sleek black Bentley. On the way to the airport, his mind was still racing with the pulse of injustice he had just experienced. To the casual observer, everything seemed normal. The blinking digital signs, busy staff checking tickets and luggage, hurried business-class passengers moving toward the check-in counters. But Damian knew that in just a few minutes, a seismic event would erupt, and it had nothing to do with the market or any contract. It was about dignity, power, and justice. He walked past the Air Nova first class check-in with the calm only a man who had built an entire technology empire from nothing could possess. Around him, he noticed scrutinizing glances, soft sighs looks passing over him because of his skin color. A seasoned agent, Sandra Mays, immediately judged that he did not belong in this space. "Excuse me, sir. This seat is reserved for platinum members," she said, polite in tone, but dripping with contempt. Damian did not flinch. He simply smiled and held up his platinum card. The entire first-class area seemed to freeze. Passengers began subtly pulling out their phones, recording the scene. None of them realized that the man they deemed out of place was the CEO of Right Tech Solutions, a $2.8 billion AI empire specializing in bias elimination in customer service, the very thing being misapplied against him at that moment. Damian knew all eyes were on him, yet he maintained his stance, his gaze cold, his authority emanating from every measured gesture. Sandra pressed further, her voice low but audible to all. "Sir, would you please move to another seat? We need this space for a VIP passenger." Damian placed his hand on the counter, speaking slowly. "This is my seat. I booked it and paid in full. I am also a platinum member." His words carried a silent warning. It was not money or title that made him important, but logic, data, and power built over years. Those around began sensing the anomaly. A white female passenger behind him, Karen Whitfield, with an air of entitlement, whispered, "I always sit here, it is practically mine." Damian heard her but did not react. He was not here to fight for a seat or to get angry. He was here to observe, to see, how a system assumed the right to choose who belonged and who did not. And right before him, Damien saw the truth. The system was deceitful, biased, and unjust. 10 minutes passed, tension rising to its peak. Sandra called over another crew member, while Damien remained calm, showing no anger or frustration. He simply listened and observed. Every movement, every word was logged in his mind. He watched Sandra's colleagues trying to conceal discomfort, yet Damien saw everything: shame, timidity, complicity with prejudice. He slowly took out his phone and made a call. Protocol Raven Initiate, full spectrum observation mode. Minutes later, the plane took off, yet Damien had not yet claimed his seat. The first-class cabin was now filled with quiet astonishment and simmering anxiety. Passengers accustomed to privileged service now witnessed a scenario they had never imagined a passenger disregarded yet, with the power to alter everything instantly. Damien did not need to make a scene. He simply maintained absolute composure, letting the system recognize that real power lies not in uniforms or seats, but in the capacity to change outcomes. At the same time, in a small cafe across from the airport, a young flight attendant named Maria sat quietly clutching her tablet. She had observed the entire scene since Damien entered first class. Inside her, a surge of indignation grew. This was not a technical error or a misunderstanding, but systemic discrimination, legitimized by those in power. Maria knew she could not remain idle. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, and sent an encrypted message to Damien. "Have seen everything. This is not just a seat, this is injustice." Those words, once transmitted, were like the drop that overflowed the cup. Damien received the information from Maria through a secure internal device, a cold smile appearing on his lips. He knew his journey had only just begun. Observing, recording, and evaluating the airline staff's behavior was living data, and this data would determine the fate of an entire corporation. The plane landed. Damien stepped out, still unshaken. He moved through the reception area directly into the executive lounge, where he could make critical calls. His first call went to RightTech's legal team: cancel all agreements with Air Nova immediately. They have violated our core principles. Begin issuing termination notices for contracts. Within minutes, a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars collapsed. Damien did not need to argue. He did not need to create chaos. One decision, one call, and everything changed. At Air Nova headquarters, the CEO, managers, and staff now understood that even the smallest injustice could become the root of catastrophe. The story didn't end with Damien. Maria, the flight attendant, felt a surge of empowerment. Even as a subordinate, she had dared to acknowledge injustice. Thanks to her decision, data was collected, unethical employees would face consequences, and an unjust process was overturned. In the hours that followed, the stock market reacted to the news journalists received information from Damien and Maria. Air Nova faced comprehensive criticism. Stock prices plummeted. The brand suffered significant damage, and respect had to be reconsidered. Damien walked calmly, as if nothing had happened yet. Change had been enacted, the data preserved, and corporate systems could no longer revert to their former state. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, recalling the years of struggle when he had been underestimated for his background. It all led to this moment. A CEO didn't need to rage to change an entire airline. A young employee like Maria could ignite justice, and even the most subtle injustice would be held accountable. And Damien knew that in the business world, those underestimated often hold the true power. They need no display, no shouting, only composure, decisiveness, and the ability to translate observation into action at precisely the right moment. This was a lesson for the entire system. Justice waits for no one, and real power emerges only when you understand its value. Chicago O'Hare Airport buzzed with motion, rolling luggage, echoing in rhythm announcements, crackling sharply through the speakers. But to Damien Walker, each sound, each hurried step faded into the background. He walked through the polished airport corridors like a man out of time, slow, deliberate steps carrying the power honed over 2 decades building right tech solutions. He didn't look at the information screens or the bustling travelers. Instead, his gaze swept every gesture, every expression, searching for signs of injustice, observing how a system arrogated itself the authority to decide who deserved and who did not. He knew every contemptuous glance, every forced smile, every dismissive gesture was being logged, integrated into the living data he was gathering in his mind. Ahead, the Air Nova check-in desk erupted with blinking screens, hurried steps, and anxious chatter. A young attendant, Maria, stood still, hands trembling, yet her eyes radiated a courage few could see. She had just transmitted a message to Damien through a secure internal device. They are discriminating. I have seen everything. Damien smiled faintly, like a teacher watching a pupil master a lesson. This was data, not emotion, and when acted upon correctly, data was the greatest power. He walked straight to the VIP lounge, where he would make critical calls. Each step echoed lightly, yet in the confined space, it emphasized absolute composure. No one there guessed that the man in the grey suit-face calm was the one holding the future of Air Nova in his hands. He opened his brown leather briefcase and focused on his phone. The first call, Right Tech S Legal Team. His voice was cold measured, precise, sharp as a blade. Cancel all scheduled signings with Air Nova. Immediately issue notices, terminating all contracts. Based on Clause 4 Bravo violation of core principles. No further explanation required. Within minutes, $500 million in contracts vanished. No yelling, no arguing, just one decision, one command. And the entire Air Nova organization began to realize they had underestimated the man in seat. Too alpha, but true power had never belonged to them. Maria looked at Damien, eyes full of awe and a trace of fear. A subordinate, yet the trigger for data to be recorded and justice to be executed. Damien nodded subtly. Her courage and integrity had become an extension of the power he wielded. Immediately, Damien redirected calls to the information and strategic partner teams. He instructed urgent notifications to all stakeholders about the contract cancellation and prepared a new partnership with a replacement party, one with proven integrity, professionalism, and respect for clients. This was not just a cancellation, it was a redefinition of the value of power. Meanwhile, at Air Nova headquarters in Atlanta, CEO Nathan Hale smiled smugly, preparing champagne to celebrate the deal. Minutes later, he received an email from the legal team, notice of termination of intent to partner from Right Tech Solutions, effective immediately. Nathan S.'s smile froze. Everything had happened too fast. Looking back, he realized that the contempt shown to a first-class customer, the overconfidence of the staff, and the arrogant attitudes of VIP attendants had created unforeseen consequences. What they thought were minor details, harmless injustices in the first-class cabin, had ignited a financial catastrophe. The calls, internal notifications, emails, and data Damien Walker had leveraged became a test, a warning mechanism for the entire industry. His actions reflected all the negligence, bias, and injustice perpetrated by employees who assumed the right to judge. No one saw Damien lose his temper. They only saw commanding silence. Yet that silence was dismantling the old system and laying the foundation for a new future. Maria, sitting quietly at the desk, still trembling, felt a surge of faith. She knew her small action had triggered a domino effect. Just one person willing to see injustice, record it, and deliver it to the right hands, power could overturn everything. The scene at Air Nova headquarters grew chaotic. Managers and executives scrambled to contact Damien, but he had every scenario prepared. No call could change the decision. Damien Walker had used the power of data preparation and personal integrity to make a negligent company pay. He recalled his hard years as a child when every glance deemed him unworthy. Now the power he had once dreamed of from understanding knowledge, experience, and justice was manifest. He did not need to rage or shout to change the world. He only needed to act precisely at the right moment and remain steadfast to principle. In the following hours, information leaked to the market. The media began to cover it. The story of a CEO underestimated, yet wielding true power, a courageous employee witnessing injustice, how a minor action in first class could obliterate $500 million in contracts became a topic of industry-wide discussion. Stakeholders, journalists, and partners realized that power does not lie in appearances, but in the ability to transform data and justice into action. Damien stepped out of the lounge, still holding his phone and tablet gaze calm, as if on a casual walk. Yet everything he had done had created an irreversible shock, reminding the world that underestimating someone based on bias or skin color always carries a cost. And in silence, true power proved itself not the loud commands, but those underestimated hold the fate in their hands. Damien smiled a quiet smile, not boastful, not loud, only enough for him to sense that everything was proceeding according to plan. Composure, determination, and the ability to see through human nature had generated the power to transform an entire industry. The Air Nova headquarters in Atlanta was never quiet on a normal morning, but today the tension exceeded any usual level. Senior managers gathered around the electronic screens, eyes fixed on the notification from Right Tech Solutions. Cancel the contract. Immediately. Violation of core principles. The sound of clicking keyboards, ringing phones, and deep sighs blended into a chaotic symphony of panic. Nathan Hale, CEO of Air Nova, stood in the conference room, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, coffee cup in hand, now cold. His face was strained, wrinkles accentuated under the fluorescent lights. "What the hell is happening?" he asked, his hoarse voice echoing in the room. The legal team tried to explain, but their words fell flat. A $500 million contract expected to rescue the airline, as precarious finances had disappeared in minutes. Every email, every crew report, every image from first-class cabins had been recorded and analyzed by Damien Walker. Nathan looked at the screen and for the first time realized the man they had dismissed, forced out of seat. 2 Alpha was holding their fate in his hands. Pressure descended on every employee and manager from the cabin to the operations floor. Staff who had previously smirked, sneered, or ignored their duties now panicked, recognizing that each minor action in first class had triggered an immediate business catastrophe. Maria, the young flight attendant, now sitting in the crew break room, trembled slightly, but felt pride swell within her. She knew the information she provided had directly altered the course of events. Damien, calm and cold, did not need to rage or shout. One phone call, a single tap on the secure device, and the entire $500 million contract was voided. Everything happened quietly, but with such impact that Air Nova was completely blindsided. Across social media, clips of Damien being asked to leave his seat, his composed expression, and the first-class staff's lack of respect began to circulate. The hashtag Boycott Air Nova quickly became a global trend, accumulating millions of views, comments, and shares. People were outraged at the public injustice Damien endured, yet equally impressed by the power he wielded. Silence, data, and principle became tools to dismantle an unjust system. In the Air Nova office, Nathan flipped through flight reports, videos, and cabin explanations repeatedly. Every piece of evidence confirmed one thing: no system error. This was a deliberate, biased, and blatant act of discrimination. He realized that small actions in first class had toppled the deal, and now the consequences were pressing down on all staff and management. Emergency calls rang continuously. The board, legal team, and PR staff were in disarray. They attempted to contact Damien, but he had routed all communications through Right Tech's legal department. Damien knew that power did not require direct dialogue to enact change. He sent a personal message to Maria: "You did right. Your data observation and integrity prevented an even larger failure." Her heart swelled, knowing that even an ordinary employee could become a critical link if aligned with justice. At the same time, media outlets, press blogs, social networks jumped in. The story became a lesson for Air Nova. Articles analyzed how an airline, proud of its first-class service, had ignored true customer value just to appease wealthy but unethical passengers. Damien became a symbol, yet he needed no spotlight. The power lay in action, and data, not attention. On the stock exchange, Air Nova's shares plummeted. The market reacted violently, lost trust, lost value, and the entire expansion strategy thrown into question. Nathan Hale sat frozen in his office, hands shaking as he held his tablet, eyes wide at the red figures indicating a 28% drop within an hour. The $500 million contract was just the tip. The media fallout and customer dissatisfaction caused far greater damage. Damien stood outside the meeting room, looking toward the runway. He felt no regret, no elation. He understood one thing: true power manifests in moments when one is underestimated. Those who assume authority based on appearance or skin color ultimately pay the price, while those underestimated, if they know how to leverage data and principle, can change entire systems. Within hours, the entire Air Nova personnel began feeling the pressure. Employees who had intentionally shown bias or ignored protocol could no longer deny responsibility. Damien had transformed the injustice of one first-class moment into undeniable evidence of systemic failure. Anyone who had believed that power only resided in title now had to learn a painful lesson: real power does not belong to the loudest, but to those who know how to use knowledge, data, and principles. Simultaneously, Maria, the young flight attendant, became an internal symbol. Her courage was recognized, and she understood that sometimes an ordinary employee can become the spark that changes an entire organization. Damien needed no further acknowledgement. The results were already evident through the data, the media, and Air Nova's panic. While Nathan struggled to control the situation, Damien had prepared an alternative partnership, another airline, honest, professional, and respectful of customers. This was the final strategic move, creating direct pressure while redirecting the market toward a worthy partner. He sat quietly watching the displays of data notifications and first-class cabin footage, a slight smile forming. No one noticed him, and no one knew that his calm was a tool of power. And that was the most powerful message. When power is applied correctly, it needs no exaggeration, no rebellion, yet it is strong enough to change an entire industry. The consequences wouldn't end today. Air Nova now faced sweeping internal changes, reviewing procedures, retraining staff, and even re-examining its entire service culture. Damien had transformed a personal injustice into a monumental overturn, a strategic lesson for the entire airline industry. In the faint light of the airport office, Damien closed his eyes, exhaled and absorbed every detail, the injustice, the arrogance, the silence, and the integrity. He knew that power does not come from anger, shouting, or prominence, but from calm analysis and decisive action at the right moment. And so, in absolute silence, a $500 million contract was cancelled, a system was tested, and an airline learned a costly lesson about justice, respect, and true power. Damien Rose walked through the corridors, calm as if nothing had happened, yet each step left a mark across the system, a powerful reminder no one should be underestimated if they know how to wield their power at the right time. The world outside Chicago O'Hare Airport had no idea that within just a few hours, a $500 million contract had vanished. On social media, however, clips from the first-class cabin began circulating at lightning speed. Images of Damien Walker being asked to leave seat 2 Alpha, his composed expression, and the airline staff's dismissive attitude quickly ignited a media storm. Hashtags flooded Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Boycott Air Nova. Fairness matters, justice in business. This story was not just about a cancelled contract. It was about injustice, prejudice, and latent power. Those who had remained silent were now awakened. Loyal customers, shareholders, and potential partners began to question whether they truly wanted to work with a company whose culture permitted discrimination, even in first class. Inside the Air Nova headquarters, Nathan Hale froze in place, hands shaking, mouth dry as sand. Executives and senior managers gathered around him, eyes filled with fear. The employees who had once thought Damien was just another passenger now seemed more formidable than a financial storm. They realized that true power didn't lie with those controlling first-class seats or customer priority scores, but with someone who knew how to leverage data knowledge and principles to produce immediate consequences. "What is happening?" a budget director asked, voice trembling eyes, unable to meet Nathan S. A $500 million contract vanished in mere minutes, Nathan repeated, panic in his voice. The directors began flipping through reports, emails from the first-class cabin video clips, and internal data Damien had collected. Every piece of evidence confirmed one thing: no system error, no accidental oversight, all stemming from ignorance, prejudice, and an assumed right to judge. Meanwhile, Damien Walker stood outside the conference room, phone in hand, eyes cold. He did not need to yell or threaten. Everything had already been decided. Air Nova would pay the price. But Damien had also prepared an alternative plan. He understood that a contract wasn't everything. Reputation, principle, and respect were the foundation for building a lasting empire. On social platforms, articles, blogs, and video clips quickly drew millions of views. Analysts, commentators, and investors began assessing Air Nova had failed to uphold a first-class service culture, lost credibility and customer trust, and the fact that an employee unable to comprehend protocol had determined the fate of a $500 million contract was proof of internal weakness. Shareholders panicked further. The board convened an emergency meeting, but even collectively, no decision could reverse the impact of the data and media. Damien had used time observation and principles to transform a minor first-class incident into an industry-wide shock. Maria, the young flight attendant, sat in the break room trembling as she watched online shares and comments. She had never imagined that her observation and documentation of discriminatory behavior could create such a global ripple effect. Yet Damien had proven that anyone could be a critical link if they dared to observe, record, and act at the right moment. At the top floor of Air Nova headquarters, Nathan Hale stared at the market data in disbelief. Air Nova's stock was plunging. The market reacted violently, brand value eroded, trust diminished, and all expansion plans and system upgrades were paused or cancelled. Financial forecasts from just a few hours ago were meaningless. Nathan realized clearly a personal act in first class had become a financial storm beyond his control. Damien Walker, however, felt no regret. He calmly monitored developments, noting every detail. He understood that true power does not come from yelling or flaunting titles. True power lies in accurately assessing reality recording data and acting at the precise moment. Maria had done her part, cabin data had been compiled, and Damien needed only a single tap to turn data into action. At the same time, journalists called continuously. Media outlets propagated the story Damien Walker, the passenger underestimated and forced from first class, was the CEO of RightTech Solutions, a $2.8 billion company, and he had cancelled a $500 million contract within minutes. Images of him sitting quietly, eyes steady, became a symbol of silent power and true authority. The impact was not limited to Air Nova. The global aviation industry began reviewing first-class service procedures, customer priority programs, and service culture. Experts emphasized that one disrespectful decision toward a VIP customer, especially one underestimated, could trigger massive financial loss and irreparable brand damage. Damien walked calmly, observing the numbers, the data and media responses, understanding that real power does not require shouting. It resides in the ability to use data and principles to adjust outcomes, even when others fail to recognize it. Maria in the break room exhaled, realizing she was also a vital part of this shockwave. For Air Nova's shareholders and management, this was a harsh lesson. No one should be underestimated, and every action, no matter how small, can reshape an entire system. Damien Walker had shown them that silence, composure, and principle could be more powerful than any shouting or media campaign. In the glow of computer screens and internal security devices, Damien smiled faintly. Everything unfolded exactly as planned. The contract cancelled, media attention, spreading the market, reacting, and the message clear: true power is the ability to transform injustice into systemic change. Maria observed Damien from afar, realizing she had witnessed a historic lesson. A small, honest, courageous action combined with power and preparation could change an entire industry. Damien did not need to command or boast. He only needed to act at the right time, in the right way, and the effect exceeded anyone's imagination. Across the airport and Air Nova offices, the message spread The system may be unjust, but true power always lies with those who understand the value of data principles and human dignity. Damien Walker walked calmly each step, marking the end of a chapter of injustice and the beginning of a new era where power is built from composure, decisiveness, and ethical standards. When Damien Walker stepped out of the airport meeting room, the world outside appeared unchanged. Announcements echoed, wheels rolled on the polished floors, and passengers hurried past. Yet Damien knew that everything had shifted forever, not just for Air Nova, but for the entire aviation industry. He entered the VIP lounge, settling into a familiar leather chair. His hand lightly touched the tablet, where compiled data from first-class cabin staff, feedback, and security footage had already been aggregated. Damien exhaled calmly, eyes steady and thoughtful, considering his next move. A $500 million contract had been cancelled. Air Nova S stock had plummeted, media attention was explosive. But this was only the first step of a much larger strategy. He opened the list of potential partners, Starbound Airways, Meridian Logistics, and several smaller but reputable airlines that had demonstrated consistent service standards and respect for customers. Damien did not need empty promises or flashy PR. He required transparent operations, real data, and staff adherence to principles. The first call was made, his voice calm, precise, authoritative. "Hello, this is Damien Walker of RightTech Solutions. We have cancelled our contract with the current partner due to violation of core principles. We would like to discuss strategic collaboration opportunities with your company." Every word carried weight without boasting or anger. The recipients immediately recognized the influence in his tone. A CEO did not need to shout to command attention across the industry. While Damien called, Maria observed from a distance, noting every remaining staff response in the cabin. She realized her courage had not only generated critical data, but also laid the foundation for Damien to make a precise replacement decision. The combination of Damien S. authority and the employee S. integrity created an unstoppable force. A virtual meeting was convened in the lounge. Executives from Starbound Airways and Meridian Logistics joined eyes wide as they realized the scope of the impact of the recent decision. Damien did not need to appear threatening, yet every data slide from the first-class cabin, every report of discriminatory behavior, and all evidence collected from staff convinced the partners that Air Nova could not be trusted. He presented the replacement plan. The new contract would deploy a comprehensive AI logistics system, ensuring transparency in warehouse management, transportation, and customer service. Every element of the plan was based on real data, not promises or PR spin. Damien knew once again that true power lay in transforming data into systematic action, not in intimidation or prestige. Meanwhile, at Air Nova, Nathan Hale stood before screens displaying Damien S. calls and emails. Each response sent to potential partners pierced his confidence. They had once thought Damien was just a passenger, but now they saw the man who had overturned a $500 million contract with calm and principle, simultaneously establishing a chain of new agreements with competitive partners. Shareholders received the first news of RightTech seeking replacement partners. Panic ensued. Air Nova S stock continued to fall, and social media coverage only intensified the impact. Investors quickly realized that Air Nova had lost not only the contract, but also credibility and trust. Damien had proven that underestimating a person does not reflect their true capability. Maria continued to document every expression of Air Nova staff, every first-class cabin action, every internal message. She recognized that this change was not only a lesson for one airline, but a warning for the entire industry. Neglect principles and customers, and the consequences will be severe. Damien reviewed the data, a faint smile forming. Silence, composure, and decisiveness had created a storm without raising a voice. In the following hours, Damien finalized a series of contracts with reliable partners. They did not just receive the technology, but also joined a system enforcing first-class service standards, where data was collected and applied to ensure that customers, employees, and principals were always respected. Damien had transformed a lesson in power and prejudice into a transparent, scalable business model. Media outlets buzzed incessantly the story of the first-class cabin, the brave employee witnessing injustice, and the underestimated CEO wielding real power quickly became a reference point across the industry. The lesson extended beyond Air Nova to the global airline and service industries. Silence, honesty, and principle can dismantle prejudice and create systemic change. Air Nova's stock continued to tumble, while the shares of Damien's selected partners surged. Every movement demonstrated that true power does not reside in titles or loud commands, but in the ability to combine data observation and strategic action. Damien Walker walked calmly, requiring no applause, no media spectacle, but every step reshaped the entire aviation landscape. Maria looked at Damien one last time before leaving the lounge, realizing she had become a critical link in a power system where a person who acts at the right moment can influence an entire industry. Damien needed no further words. Every action of his had demonstrated the truth. Silence and principle are sometimes more powerful than any outburst, and those who once underestimated others would pay the price for their ignorance. With the next steps, Damien was ready to deploy the full RightTech system across the new partners, ensuring that no errors would recur. Every customer would be respected, every employee treated fairly, and every decision transparent. The cancellation of a $500 million contract was only the beginning. The next step was to rebuild industry standards based on data justice and true power. In the late afternoon light of Chicago Airport, Damien stepped outside, eyes calm but deeply focused. He looked toward the vast sky, where all flights were preparing for departure, where power and opportunity were being redistributed. Damien knew that a person underestimated, if acting at the right moment, could change an entire industry, a market, and the way the world perceives true authority. At Air Nova headquarters in Atlanta, the atmosphere was now suffocating. Electronic screens flickered with line after line of data video clips from first-class cabins, emails, and internal reports displaying before the manager's eyes. Looking at it all, Nathan Hale, CEO of Air Nova, realized they no longer had control. The $500 million contract was gone, the stock was plunging, and the company's reputation was being torn apart in public. Emergency calls rang non-stop from partners, investors, and shareholders. Everything they had once considered certain had dissolved into chaos. Nathan stood in the center of the room, tablet in hand, eyes wide as he stared at the red numbers signaling market collapse. He recalled the moment in the first-class cabin, Damien Walker sitting calmly, eyes steady, no yelling needed, yet holding all the power in his hands. Employees who had once been confident now began to fear. Maria, the flight attendant who had observed everything from the start, now felt pride instead of trepidation. She realized that her small actions, daring to observe, document the injustice, and report it to Damien, had become living evidence, providing the foundation for a decision that altered a $500 million contract. Media attention surged. Articles, videos, and social media commentary highlighted that Air Nova had failed to uphold first-class service standards. Financial experts noted that one disrespectful action toward a VIP customer, especially someone underestimated, could lead to massive financial loss and long-term damage to brand reputation. Damien Walker became a symbol of true power, of someone underestimated, but capable of transforming an entire industry. Inside the Air Nova conference room, Nathan faced a scene worse than he could have imagined. Top executives, frozen shareholders, anxious PR teams struggling to contain the media storm. Clips from the first-class cabin were circulating everywhere. The calm gaze of Damien, the contemptuous and condescending looks from Air Nova staff, all became public evidence of injustice. Employees who had acted with bias, those who had mocked or dismissed Damien, now faced the outrage of media and public opinion. Some senior staff were suspended, pending investigation. Others required immediate explanation. Damien never named anyone yet. The data he had collected spoke justice on its own. Shareholders and investors began to act. Some cancelled investment plans. Others tried to reach Damien directly to understand the situation. But he had closed all direct communication channels, routing everything through the legal team to ensure every decision was based on principle and data, not emotion or personal pressure. On social media, the community rallied. Past customers shared experiences of discriminatory service. Business analysts highlighted internal management failures, and the hashtag Boycott Air Nova became a global trend. Damien Walker, once forced from first class, now symbolized the power of calm observation and acting at the right moment. Maria, standing in the crew break room, felt a quiet surge of pride. She realized her actions had not only provided Damien with enough data to make a decision, but had also changed how the company and the industry perceived power and justice. An ordinary employee, if acting correctly, could become a critical link in a global shockwave. Meanwhile, Damien had completed contact with new partners, Starbound Airways and Meridian Logistics. All partners understood that trust, transparency, and respect for customers were prerequisites for collaboration. Damien established clear terms ensuring no errors like those at Air Nova would be repeated. At Air Nova, Nathan Hale tried to coordinate an emergency meeting, but every response was too late. Previous decisions, overconfidence of staff, and condescending attitudes had produced irreversible consequences. Damien's calls to new partners made Nathan realize that true power does not come from a title or a first-class seat, but from the ability to observe, collect data, and make strategic decisions. Damien stepped out of the meeting room, calm as if nothing had happened. Each step on the polished floor was a lesson for Air Nova. Silence, consistency, and principle can be stronger than any shouting or media pressure. The fallout spread. All discriminatory staff were suspended or investigated. Shareholders panicked. The market fell, and the media continued coverage. Damien neither celebrated nor boasted. His calm was the strongest message. True power belongs to those who act at the right moment in the right way, and based on data, not appearances or luxury seats. The story of Damien Walker quickly spread through the aviation industry. A CEO underestimated, forced from first class, yet holding the power to alter contracts, stocks and company culture through calm and data. Airlines began reviewing procedures, service culture, and ethical standards in first-class cabins. Damien had proven one thing clearly: anyone can change a system if they know how to wield power at the right time and in the right way. Maria looked at Damien one last time before leaving, realizing she had become a key part of this chain reaction. A small, honest, courageous action combined with strategic power could change an entire industry. Damien needed only silence and timely action, and the impact exceeded all expectations. In the evening light filtering through Chicago airport windows, Damien stepped outside, calm but resolute. He had closed a chapter of injustice and opened a new era where power is built on data principles and composure, not on showmanship or shouting. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the skyscrapers, reflecting off the gleaming glass of Chicago, as Damien Walker stood on the balcony of his hotel room, looking down at the bustling traffic on Wall Street. Life flowed on, yet everything had changed. He was no longer underestimated, no longer an ordinary passenger asked to leave first class. The power he held had now transformed into strategic influence, capable of shaping the direction of the entire aviation industry. In his hands, Damien held a tablet displaying first-class cabin data staff reports, video clips, and direct feedback from Maria, the courageous flight attendant who had recorded every instance of discriminatory behavior. He opened the analytics software, each line of data, each moment of injustice becoming the foundation for building a new partnership strategy. Damien knew that a cancelled $500 million contract was not the end, it was the beginning of redirecting power and value across the industry. His first call went to Starbound Airways, an airline with a proven record of transparent operations, staff compliance, and exceptional customer service. His voice was calm, composed, yet authoritative. "Hello, this is Damien Walker of Right Tech Solutions. We would like to discuss the possibility of comprehensive collaboration. We require a partner with a culture of transparency and principle, with no tolerance for errors or bias." The recipient paused for a moment before responding. "We are ready, Mr. Walker. We understand the importance and will comply with all requirements." Minutes later, Damien contacted Meridian Logistics, an airline and logistics provider chosen based on objective evidence, operational data, customer evaluations, and feedback from honest employees. Damien outlined the full plan, from deploying the AI logistics system, enforcing first-class service standards, to managing customer data. Every detail was calculated, precisely leaving no room for bias or injustice. Meanwhile, Air Nova was in chaos. Nathan Hale and senior management could hardly believe what had transpired. They had thought Damien was just an underestimated VIP passenger, but now he had proven that real power does not reside in titles, first-class seats, or uniforms, but in the ability to observe, gather data, and act based on principles and standards. Maria sat in the crew break room, eyes fixed on the data dashboard, no longer trembling. She recognized that her role, though small, had become a critical link, enabling Damien to act decisively. Every note, every detail she observed was evidence of injustice that he leveraged to create change. Damien began drafting the new contract. The terms were meticulous, covering AI logistics deployment, first-class service standards, employee oversight, and guaranteed customer respect. He required no PR or promotion. Everything was enforced through data and contractual conditions, making clear to Air Nova and competitors that compliance with standards was the prerequisite for working with Right Tech. Media attention surged. Clips of Damien in the first class, cabin, his calm gaze, the staff's condescending attitude, and his composed handling of the contract circulated across all platforms. Articles and financial analyses confirmed that Air Nova had failed to maintain service culture standards, lost credibility, and forfeited a $500 million contract. Damien became a symbol of the power of composure and principle. Air Nova shareholders realized that the loss was not only financial. They faced diminished market trust, damaged relationships with partners, and brand vulnerability. Damien had proven that an underestimated individual could transform an entire system if they knew how to wield power correctly and precisely. While Damien completed the rollout of new contracts with Starbound Airways and Meridian Logistics, Maria recorded every behavior reaction and cabin data point. She understood that her integrity had directly impacted Damien's strategic decisions. An ordinary employee, if observant and willing to act correctly, could generate a global effect. Air Nova no longer held power. Stocks fell, media attacks intensified, and the entire internal organization was in turmoil. From the VIP lounge, Damien observed everything calmly. He did not smile, he did not boast. His composure and precision had already reshaped the industry. Within hours, the new contracts with Starbound Airways and Meridian Logistics were finalized, ensuring that RightTech Solutions would continue deploying the AI logistics system, maintain service standards, uphold data transparency, and respect customers. Damien had transformed a personal injustice into a comprehensive strategy, consolidating influence and authority, while delivering a strategic lesson to the entire airline industry. Across social media, Damien's story spread an underestimated CEO, forced from first class, yet wielding true power to reshape contracts, stocks, and company culture through calm and data. Other airlines began reviewing procedures, service standards, and internal culture, recognizing that unaddressed injustice can ignite financial and reputational disasters. Damien had demonstrated that silence, observation, and principle can be more powerful than any shouting or media pressure. Air Nova's stock continued to fall. Potential partners shifted to collaborate with RightTech, and the entire aviation industry learned a lesson in power ethics and justice. Damien Walker, once underestimated, now stood at the pinnacle of influence, proving that true power does not reside in titles or appearances, but in the ability to act decisively based on data principles and composure. Maria, witnessing everything, smiled. She understood that she had become part of a shockwave transforming the entire industry. A small, honest, courageous action combined with strategic power could change an entire sector from the market to corporate culture. Damien needed only silence and timely action, and the effect exceeded all expectations. In the twilight light streaming through the Chicago airport windows, Damien stepped outside, calm yet resolute. He had closed a chapter of injustice and opened a new era where power is built on data principles and composure, not on showmanship or shouting. 6 months had passed since the upheaval in the first-class cabin, and New York City was as busy as ever yet. The world of Air Nova had changed completely. The once mighty headquarters was silent, the large conference rooms empty of the confident eyes that had filled them, before replaced by a heavy atmosphere weighed down by irreversible consequences. Nathan Hale, the once confident CEO, slumped into his chair, hands shaking as he held his tablet. The company's stock had plunged from day one, and all expansion plans and system upgrades had been cancelled. Damien Walker, by contrast, remained composed, as if nothing had happened. He stood on the balcony of the new RightTech Solutions office, looking over the city, where every step he had taken had now built a new empire, transparent and principle-based. He did not need to flaunt his power. Everything unfolded quietly, precisely, and effectively. His true power required no attention, only action at the right moment, executed correctly and based on data. At Air Nova, employees who had once been arrogant in the first-class cabin now faced harsh reality. Staff like Chase Whitfield, previously cocky, confident, and dismissive of Damien, had become a symbol of personal failure. He had once assumed that power and privilege were naturally his, but now the world knew that every small act, every arrogant attitude could lead to catastrophic consequences. Senior managers who had once confidently coordinated the cabin and catered to VIPs now faced internal investigations. Every piece of data Damien had collected, each action, every word, every unjust glance was now indisputable evidence. Those who believed power resided in titles, uniforms, or first-class seats realized that true power belongs to those who observe, analyze, and act at the right time. Maria, the courageous flight attendant, had become a pivotal figure in transforming the aviation industry. Recognized directly by Damien, she became an internal training advisor for new airline partners, collaborating with RightTech, ensuring that employees understood and followed standards of fairness, equity, and transparency. Her small but courageous action had become a critical link in guiding the entire system in the right direction. Air Nova, after its catastrophic failure, underwent a comprehensive internal restructuring. The old leadership was replaced. Employees who had been biased or unjust were terminated or suspended, and the entire system for monitoring first-class cabins, VIP priority processes, and service culture had to be re-evaluated. The lesson was clear: no one could disregard principles, and even minor injustice could produce industry-wide repercussions. Meanwhile, RightTech Solutions under Damien S. leadership successfully signed new contracts with Starbound Airways and Meridian Logistics. The partners not only provided transparent operations and logistics, but also committed to strict adherence to first-class service standards, ensuring that any unjust behavior would be promptly detected and corrected. Damien had transformed a contractual failure into a strategic lesson, consolidating power and establishing new industry standards. Media attention continued unabated. Clips from the first-class cabin showing Damien being asked to leave, and his composed gaze became a symbol of true power. Analysts noted that Damien had created a model for principled behavior, where data observation and standards could reshape entire operational systems without shouting or media pressure. Air Nova S shareholders realized that trust and reputation could be lost in minutes, but restoring them was extremely difficult. Stock prices continued to fall, VIP customers turned away, and competitors quickly filled the gap left by RightTech. Damien Walker, once underestimated, had converted his latent power into an industry-wide shockwave, demonstrating that silence and composure could sometimes be more powerful than any display of force. Maria was now highlighted in the media as an example of a courageous employee. She became an inspiration for airline and service staff, proving that even an ordinary individual could transform an entire system if they observed and acted correctly. Damien acknowledged this understanding that the strength of power lies not only in the leader, but also in those around them who dare to uphold justice and principles. In Damien's office, The evening light streamed through the skyscraper windows, reflecting on the tablet displaying cabin data staff feedback and market results. He reviewed the entire sequence of events from the moment he was forced from Seat 2, Alpha Maria S. Courage, to the ripple effects across the industry. Every detail fit together into a complete picture of power, where principal data and timely action determine outcomes. The final consequences for Air Nova were irreversible. The brand lost credibility. CEO Nathan Hale was forced to resign. Unjust managers were terminated, and the entire company underwent restructuring. Employees who had witnessed injustice like Chase Whitfield now became symbols of arrogance punished. Damien and RightTech, on the other hand, consolidated power, established new standards, and became an industry model for using power correctly based on data and principles. The story concluded, but its lessons spread a moment of underestimation can create a tsunami that transforms an entire industry if the person underestimated knows how to observe, document, and act. Damien Walker, once considered an ordinary passenger, proved that true power belongs to those who leverage knowledge, data, and principle, and that silence, composure, and decisiveness can dismantle prejudice. Maria, now a training advisor for airline staff, smiled as she recalled the first-class cabin incident. She realized that a small, honest, and courageous action, when combined with strategic power, could change the entire industry. Damien needed no fame, no shouting. All the power he required was expressed through action data and principle. As Damien stood on the balcony, looking toward the horizon over the city, he understood that silence could be powerful, prejudice could be overturned, and true authority does not reside in position or title, but in acting at the right moment with data and principles. A $500 million contract had been cancelled, an airline had been toppled, and those who had underestimated Damien had learned a costly lesson. Maria became the silent hero. The aviation industry learned a crucial lesson, and Damien Walker continued to build the RightTech Solutions empire, where value, principle, and justice stand above all. In the final moment, Damien closed his eyes, exhaled, and felt a deep sense of calm. He had proven that sometimes the most underestimated person is the one who wields the greatest power, and that silence, composure, and decisiveness can change the entire world. From the perspective of a corporate culture and human behavior expert, Damien Walker's story demonstrates a crucial point. True power does not reside in titles or appearances, but in the ability to recognize injustice, act at the right moment, and uphold steadfast principles. A single underestimated moment, a calm yet strategic action, can transform an entire system, reshape an industry, and establish new standards for the future. This is a valuable lesson in leadership, showing that influence relies not only on authority, but on intelligence, data, and integrity. If this story inspires you, click like to let us know, and don't forget to subscribe to follow other real-life stories where principle and justice take precedence over profit. Leave a comment with the phrase "Stand firm" to remind each other that sometimes it only takes one person daring to stand up to change an entire system.